The IDF says it has struck a number of Hezbollah terror infrastructure sites in southern Lebanon overnight. This as troops are moving forward with operations in Rafah and central Gaza.
Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah today calling on all Arab states to take a stance.
Our response, God willing, will be strong, influential and effective. Between us and Israel are only a few days and nights till we meet in the battlefield.
Meanwhile, Hezbollah says they'll keep striking Israel with or without Iran's help. The two sides exchanging fire over the Lebanon border, with one Israeli strike killing 5 people on Tuesday.
The IDF also telling civilians in certain parts of southern Gaza to move ahead of more military operations. And it's true, Diane, Israel's war in Gaza has been overshadowed this week by the threat of strikes by Iran and or by Hezbollah.
Israel lives in an existential moment. They either succeed or their enemies seek to eliminate them.
To the Middle East tonight, while the region braces for a retaliatory strike from Iran on Israel, the Israeli military now confirms it killed another Hamas commander in Lebanon.
General, people should understand how this ends has everything to do with if it starts up again. Everybody wants the hostages out, but if you leave Hamas intact, it's only going to be worse the next time. And if you read the Institute for the Study of War that you put out every day, it reveals what is really going on.
There's also uncertainty about how the dozens of Iranian proxy groups will respond. Earlier this week, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah called the groups an axis and said they will coordinate their attacks on Israel. And the Houthi leader followed up with similar remarks yesterday.
Our operations to target the Israeli enemy, as well as coordination with the Axis in any joint operations, is a decision by everyone.
And the IDF is still targeting those proxies. On Friday, they took out a senior Hamas commander in Lebanon with an airstrike.
What we are seeing is increased tension throughout the region and really signs of escalation at the moment between Israel and Hamas, Hezbollah and Iran. And right now, it's hard to kind of see the light in those negotiations.
So, Daryl, can these talks even really play out amid just the continued Israeli strikes and the ensuing threats of revenge?
But you see, the Bible, which predates the Quran by 1,000 years, tells us an opposite story. It says in Genesis 21, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. This ancient hostility is fomented by Satan, and it brews within the pits of hell to create the most virulent kind of anti-Semitism, whose ultimate goal is the genocide of the Jewish people, and not simply stopping with the destruction of Israel, but the genocide of the Jews, who they view as, in a very Hitlerian way, they're not really people, they're vermin. This is why Nazism and Islam, radical Islam, merge together so well. You see, you have to understand there's nothing logical, rational, reasonable about such virulent hatred.
Cameron, does Israel have the defenses to be able to defend themselves on 3 separate fronts?
An excellent question. I think at the end of the day, they do. Israel is also facing quite a bit of resources because of Iran having access to finances and the buildup of different military infrastructure in Lebanon and other areas. But their military in Israel is very unique to most. The integration between the different armed services, their aviation wings, their boots on the ground, as well as a lot of their advanced technology to improve the effort of the warfighter is quite remarkable. It's unlike any other nation in the world, second to the United States. So I think they can take on most enemies that are at least 5 to 10 times their size. And they've done it time and time again.
Yeah, it's a powerful nation.
When he says in chapter 12, this is the word of the Lord concerning Israel, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. And on that day when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations, and all who try to move it will injure themselves. How strange that a small, relatively insignificant nation in the middle of a relatively unimportant part of the world could become the epicenter of world events, so much that all the world would be troubling themselves about it. For Jesus to say that 2,000 years ago, or Zechariah to say it 2,700 years ago, you say, man, that guy is a great guesser, and he should play the lottery. Because it's just incalculable. Yet despite repeated efforts by world powers over the last 70 years to resolve the conflict between the surrounding nations that he speaks of, Israel remains the number one flashpoint of international concern, even more than Ukraine. And we find historically from the time of Truman up to Biden, the Middle East problem not only remains, but it's part of what Jesus foretold. He said the nations would be distress and perplexity in those times because there would be just wars and rumors of wars. When he said to Abraham at the very beginning of the genesis of the nation of Israel, he told Abraham regarding him and his descendants forever, he says, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. When Jesus said in Matthew 25, when you refuse to help my brothers and sisters, you are refusing to help me. And there are people who are saying, well, they're not born again believers, but in Jeremiah 36, he said, I'm going to do this one more time. He said the whole great story, the valley of dry bones, dry, desiccated bones. He's talking about Israel being this destroyed and dead nation. We know one thing about dead people, they don't come back to life except once. And we know that when people have decayed to the point where there's no sinew, flesh, or anything else, just white bleached bones laying on the ground, we do not expect them to come back to life. And yet he said, Son of man, can these bones live? And he says, Lord, you know. And the Lord said, suddenly the Spirit of God began to move and they began to reconnect. And he said, suddenly there was a great nation of my people. And God foretold, I'm going to rebuild them. But he told them in the previous chapter, I'm not going to do it for your sake. I'm going to do it for my sake. I was talking to a young serviceman, Israeli IDF soldier one time, and I said, well, a lot of our soldiers are coming back from Iraq, and they're suffering from post-traumatic syndrome. And he started laughing. He said, in Israel, everybody has post-traumatic syndrome. We've been at war our entire lives. We don't know at what moment the woman standing next to me in the market is going to pull out a knife and throw it into my chest. Because when you have a whole generation of young boys and young girls who grow up and they're taught in their schools and in their textbooks that the Jews' favorite drink is Arab's blood, and that they kidnap Arab children and to get their fat so they can use it to create oil for their lamps. Think about that when you're told that over and over again from the age where you first begin to read a book. Do you not grow up with just an incredible hatred for these vicious people? You have to understand, in the end times, the Lord said he would send a strong delusion that they would believe a lie. They would believe doctrines of demons. And so you feel a culture becomes inundated with this false information that doesn't just come from lazy journalists or people with a bent, twisted ideology. It comes again out of the very pits of hell. We fight again, not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces. So the day when we look at it, we find this is exactly what the Bible said would happen in the last days. Zechariah said, all the nations of the earth are gathered against her.
He is telling Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Iranian leadership that I'm going to finish this on my terms. And he is completely committed to it. I wish the administration was as committed as he is to the end state of this war. He knows he's got to finish off these thousands of fighters. If he leaves them in place as a result of a permanent ceasefire, Hamas wins and they just bide their time before they reattack.
So we know that our fighter jets arrived right there in the Middle East. What's that symbolic of? And number two is, are we ever going to answer for the attack at our base in Iraq?
Well, you would have thought we would have answered by now. But after all, we're wringing our hands about not wanting to escalate. Well, but did they escalate? Of course they did. And that's where we have been.
Here is the region right now and the growing fears of a wider war. What does Iran do? What do they order Hezbollah to do in Lebanon? And what happens with the ongoing war in Gaza? It is a three-front operation here, a fourth front if you throw in Yemen and the Houthis down here at the end of the Red Sea.
There have now been more than 170 attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East in less than a year.
Part of an increase of attacks on Americans in recent weeks.
Israel is under existential attack here from Hezbollah, from Hamas, from the Shia militia groups that Iran funds from Iran. So we're on the brink of something pretty large here.
Now to the war in Ukraine, taking a major turn. For the first time since the Russian invasion, the Ukrainian military is launching a large-scale assault inside Russia.
Fighter jets streaking across the sky near the Russian border of Sudza, which is home to critical natural gas infrastructure. Ukrainian troops have seized several villages and they've advanced nearly 10 miles into Russian territory. That's according to pro-Kremlin military bloggers. The Ukrainians haven't commented on this operation, but overnight their troops are also storming the Russian-occupied Kherson region in southern Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin has convened an urgent security meeting, and he's called Ukraine's incursion a large-scale provocation and vowed to crush the assault.
With the war in Ukraine, they've allied Russia and Iran, and Russia is spiriting S-300 air defense systems into Tehran at a very rapid pace. So, and that, of course, is to prepare for any kind of Israel counterattack against whatever Iran does. So we're on the brink of something pretty large here.
Russia is retaliating against a reported push by Ukraine into Russian territory. Russia's military put out this video claiming to show an attack on Ukrainian soldiers near Russia's Kursk region, which is now the scene of fierce fighting.
Ukraine is taking the fight into Russia. This video posted on social media allegedly shows its forces pouring over the border, while another on a pro-Ukrainian account appears to show Russian soldiers surrendering in large numbers. Moscow is scrambling to block the advance with artillery and airstrikes. Russia's top general tries to project an image of control, telling President Vladimir Putin the offensive of 1,000 Ukrainian troops has been halted. On the ground, a stunned Russian man tells the camera the fighting has damaged everything in his village. The White House says it wants to know Kyiv's endgame.
We are going to continue to stay focused on making sure they have what they need to defend themselves against Russia's aggression.
Ukraine is targeting Russia's Kursk region, far away from the main front lines in the east and south. The two-year-old war has ground to a stalemate. Moscow throws wave after wave at Ukrainian defenses, making small but costly gains. Meanwhile, Russian missiles continue to rain down on Ukrainian cities. On Tuesday, one damaged a clinic in Kharkiv. Ukraine hopes the recently delivered F-16 fighter jets can protect its skies and help turn the tide of the war.
China has declared the United States an adversary. They want to dominate and control the region at the expense of the United States. They want to replace the United States as the world's leader, having global impact, and take our place in doing that. And clearly they want us to lose all of our influence regionally and globally as a result of those two goals and objectives. And when we look at the United States preparations for a war dealing with China, we're challenged to win. Indeed, we could lose, and we would likely, if we're at war with China, what we're saying is that it is likely that we would find ourselves in other theaters, Russia expanding or Iran expanding as well, and find ourselves in a global war. And we haven't faced anything like that since World War II. That's the challenge that is really in front of us. And I think it's the most serious and dangerous challenges we have faced in many, many decades.
Yep.
Not because we're pessimists, but just because we're historians. And sometimes being ignorant is a lot easier than being informed. So what are we supposed to do with all this? Well, I think the first and foremost thing is, I think we need to recognize that we are living in these chapters, or we're very close to them. We're going to very potentially see these things play out in our lifetimes. We certainly see it happening in slow motion when you realize that when it says that Israel will be invaded by the Iranians and the Lebanese and the Syrians and the Iraqis and all these surrounding countries, when it says list by name who these countries are and they will surround it, and then we look at the Middle East today and go, wait a minute, that's exactly what's happening. And we see at the same time that the United States is refusing to send the armaments that the Israelis need to continue to defend themselves, especially the advanced weapons. They said, oh yeah, we're going to send them to them in 2036. Yeah, I don't think they'll need them before then. On and on it goes, and you just realize it's like we're the prisoners of history in the sense that the Bible says these are things that are going to happen.